Ilara had been longing for a sanctuary for 11 long months. Cedar Lake's pristine silence, broken only by the gentle lap of water against the shore and the distant cry of a loon. The dusty, heat-hazed memories of a forward operating base felt like a lifetime away as she stood on the creaky wooden porch of her family's rustic cabin, a steaming mug of black coffee warming her hands. This place was her anchor, the one constant that remained untouched by the chaos of her career. The only perfume she wanted was the thick scent of pine and damp earth in the air, a stark and welcome contrast to the pungent smells of fuel, sand, and tension that had filled her lungs for so long. She was dressed in worn jeans, scuffed boots, and a plain, faded flannel shirt over a thermal. Her posture, even in this state of absolute relaxation, held a straightness, a readiness that years of command had baked into her very bones. For this precious moment, she was just Ilara, a woman trying to remember what it was like to not be on high alert and not a rank or title. The sharp, unmistakable sound of a twig snapping underfoot, followed by a sudden, startled gasp, shattered this hard-won peace, which was as fragile as the morning mist curling over the glassy water. Ilara quickly and quietly turned, her trained eyes immediately scanning the tree line. A 10-year-old boy stood there frozen like a statue, his eyes wide as saucers, and he was holding a pricey, high-tech drone. He had clearly ventured beyond the boundaries of the sprawling, modern lake mansion next door, a property that screamed of new money and which had stood empty for seasons. The boy's gaze was not just one of surprise at seeing someone in the cabin that was supposed to be abandoned. Rather, it was one of pure, unadulterated fear fixed on the pale, precise scar that ran from her temple down the line of her jaw. This scar was a permanent reminder of the roadside IED that nearly killed 2 of her soldiers and nearly killed her. "Hello there," she said, her voice calm and deliberately soft, an attempt to de-escalate a situation that shouldn't have been one. His paralysis, however, appeared to be broken by the sound of her voice. He didn't speak, didn't answer. Instead, he spun on his heel and crashed back through the undergrowth toward his house with a panic that spoke of more than just being startled. It was the terror of a child who believed he had just seen a monster. Ilara sighed, a deep weariness settling in her soul. She was very familiar with that look. The scar did that. It told a story of violence that civilians couldn't understand, and it often made them recoil. She had hoped, for just 7 days, to be invisible, to exist outside of that narrative. The sound of a slamming door from the direction of the mansion echoed across the water, followed shortly by the rise of a shrill, panicked voice. The tone was clear, despite the fact that the distance had muffled the words outrage, alarm, and rapid accusations into a phone. Ilara picked out words like a woman with a knife wound on her face, and right in front of my son, and the conclusive statement, likely escaped from somewhere. Yes, in the aforementioned Miller cabin. Send someone now. Ilara leaned against the porch railing and briefly closed her eyes. That was it then. In the mind of her new neighbor, she wasn't a vacationer or a family member. She was a dangerous vagrant, a criminal, a mental patient, a threat to be neutralized. Her coffee's dregs were no match for the bitter irony. In their secure, orderly world, she had devoted her entire life to protecting the very people who now perceived her as an adversary. The cabin felt more like a bunker than a sanctuary when I went back inside. She placed her mug on the rough-hewn kitchen table with a quiet, deliberate click, the sound final in the quiet room. She could already hear the distant, approaching wail of a siren, growing louder, a sound that was as familiar to her as her own heartbeat, but one she had never expected to hear coming for her here, on her own soil, on her own property. The crunch of gravel under heavy tires announced the arrival of the local law long before the sheriff's cruiser came to a stop in front of her cabin. Ilara did not go to the window. She remained seated at the small kitchen table with a personnel report folder open in front of her, the routine leadership paperwork that had accompanied her even while she was on leave. The car door opening and closing with a firm thud, the weight of the footsteps on the porch steps, confident, measured, The walk of a man who knew his authority all caught her attention as she listened. The knock that followed was firm, official, and echoed through the small, quiet space. "It's open," she called out, her voice even and devoid of the anxiety that would be expected in such a situation. The door pushed open, and a deputy in his late 40s stepped inside, his hand resting casually near his duty belt, his eyes performing a quick professional scan of the single-room cabin. He noticed the plain furniture, the military-grade footlocker at the end of the bed, the neatly organized bookshelves on the nightstand, and then the woman at the table. His expression remained neutral and practiced as he focused briefly on the scar. "Afternoon, ma'am," he began, his tone carefully courteous but edged with official suspicion. "My name is Deputy Miller. We received a call about a suspicious person at this residence. Mind if I ask what you're doing here?" Before Ilara could even form a response, a figure burst past the deputy, invading the cabin's space with a wave of indignant energy. It was the boy's mother, a woman who stood out in the rustic setting with her perfectly highlighted hair and designer athletic gear. Her face was a mask of performative fury and fear. "That's her!" she exclaimed, pointing her well-maintained finger directly at Ilara, as if she were naming a dangerous animal in a lineup. "I warned you. Just look at her. It's clear that she's intruding, probably squatting. For years, this location has been empty, and she terrified my son. My boy came home white as a sheet. He's traumatized." Deputy Miller held up a placating hand, his patience visibly thinning. "Ma'am, please, I need you to wait outside. Let me handle this." But Karen, whose name was unquestionably Karen, was not going to be discouraged. She planted her feet, crossing her arms over her chest. "I will not. I'm the one who called you. I am entitled to be here. I want to see her arrested. She needs to be removed immediately from this property. This is a peaceful family neighborhood. We cannot allow individuals like her to simply show up, frighten our children, and cause them whatnot." Her words hung in the air, charged with prejudice and a profound sense of entitlement. Ilara merely observed, her face obscured by a mask, despite the fact that she began to feel a sharp resentment simmering within. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a character assassination based on a single glance. The deputy, clearly exasperated, turned his attention back to Ilara, his demeanor now more stern. The woman's hysterics had forced his hand, pushing him toward a more aggressive stance. "I'm going to need to see some identification, ma'am," he said, his tone leaving no room for refusal. A meeting was held by our team on Monday with the client team for the Zephyr project to review the status of the forthcoming third-quarter launch campaign. The campaign, originally built as an omni-channel activation across CTV, paid social and programmatic display, is now subject to substantial midstream revisions following newly surfaced client directives. The feedback introduces a material shift in strategic framing under a compressed delivery window. We're pivoting, as Zephyr shifts away from a performance-tracking narrative to focus on a broader story of everyday wellness and inclusivity. This means we'll need to quickly reframe our messaging, structure, and visuals to align with the new direction. To address the revised scope, I've assigned immediate follow-up actions across the team. Visual art will lead conversations with post-production around stock content integration. Ad sales will recalibrate the media plan in light of the repositioned messaging and will coordinate with DSPs to avoid penalties related to insertion order delays. The copy desk is to be tasked with stripping all unsubstantiated medical claims from the copy, implementing the new CTA, and managing a parallel review with legal. We conduct a daily internal stand-up each morning through the end of the week to identify blockers. The next client check-in is scheduled for July 3rd, where we will preview asset revisions and confirm compliance milestones. The final go-no-go decision is scheduled for July 7th at 1700 Pacific Daylight Time. We are proceeding with all mitigations in parallel and escalating any dependency delays as they surface. Ilara nodded slowly, understanding the protocol. On the counter, she didn't reach for a wallet or purse. She moved instead with a deliberate, unhurried calm that seemed to increase the room's tension. She reached into the back pocket of her jeans and pulled out a simple black leather wallet, worn soft at the edges. She placed it on the table but did not hand it to him. Instead, she slid it calmly to the edge, a silent invitation for him to retrieve it. The act itself was telling because it was not the act of someone who was afraid of authority. Deputy Miller stepped forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. As if expecting a trick, he picked up the wallet while alternating between Ilara and the wallet. He opened it. The change was instantaneous and profound. His eyebrows rose to the level of his hairline. Now, in pure, unadulterated shock, his eyes, which had been performing a routine assessment, widened. He looked from the official identification card inside to her face, his gaze now tracing the scar not with suspicion or revulsion, but with a dawning, awe-filled recognition. He was no longer looking at a suspicious squatter. He was looking at a narrative, a history of service and command that was etched not only on her face, but documented in the credentials he held. The casual, authoritative slouch vanished from his own posture. His shoulders snapped back, his spine straightened, and his chin tucked in slightly. He seemed to suddenly have a lot of weight on his wallet. Karen, utterly oblivious to the seismic shift occurring just feet away from her, mistook the deputy's stunned silence for confirmation of her own beliefs. "Well," she demanded in a shrill voice, "is it fake? Is she using a fake ID? I knew it. Additionally, I want her charged with impersonation. Do I need to call your supervisor or are you going to arrest her?" The deputy seemed not to hear her. He was in his own world, a world of protocol and respect that went much deeper than just responding to a petty call. He closed the wallet with a definitive snap, held it respectfully in both hands, and walked back to where Ilara still sat. He did not return it to her. Instead, he drew himself to his full height, his boots coming together with a sharp click that echoed in the suddenly silent cabin. His right hand came up in a sharp, perfect, and unwavering salute, his gaze fixed on a point just above her head, his expression one of utmost respect. He said, "My sincerest apologies, ma'am," in a voice that was now deep, formal, and filled with a reverence that seemed to take out all of the room's air. "Yes, General Major." With the force of a concussion grenade, the two words Major General exploded in the small cabin, breaking the dead silence. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Karen's mouth remained open, ready to deliver another insult. But no sound came out of it. The smug certainty of her face gave way to confusion, which curdled into stark, dawning disbelief, and finally solidified into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. This was a rapid, horrifying transformation. She looked completely pale as the blood drained from her face. She took an involuntary step backward, as if physically pushed by the weight of the title. Ilara, who remained seated in an unsettling stillness, caught her attention as her eyes darted from the deputy, who was frozen in his salute. Her mind was collapsing with the pieces, creating a picture that was so devastating to her worldview that it threatened to short-circuit her brain. This was not a homeless person or a criminal. Rather, it was a high-ranking military official, a major general, a woman who commanded thousands, was likely to answer to the highest levels of government, and had likely made decisions that could have saved her life. And she had just accused her of trespassing on her own property, of traumatizing her child, of being a blight on the neighborhood. It was impossible to comprehend the scope and profundity of her error. Ilara slowly stood up, an action that now seemed to carry immense gravity. She accepted the deputy's salute with a slight acknowledging nod, a gesture of grace and authority that was both dismissal and recognition. She said, "At ease, deputy," her voice remaining low but now layered with an undeniable resonant authority that appeared to fill the room. She reached out and grabbed his ID, putting it back in her pocket without ever looking at Karen, who was now furious. She then turned her full attention to the woman, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "This cabin," Ilara stated, her tone flat, factual, and utterly devoid of the anger Karen probably expected, which was somehow far worse, "has been in my family for 3 generations. I'm here on official leave." She paused, letting the words sink in, each one a nail in the coffin of Karen's dignity. "Your son saw me on my own porch. He seemed startled, so I assume he was unaware anyone was here. I meant him no alarm. I wanted to take advantage of the peace and quiet this property has always provided." The deputy turned to look at Karen, now at ease but standing more rigidly. His expression was a masterpiece of professional neutrality, barely containing a deep, personal disdain. "The matter appears to be resolved, ma'am," he stated, his voice cold. "The property is legally owned and occupied by Major General Vance. We will not be required to take any further action." Karen found her voice, but it was a pathetic, broken whisper, a stark contrast to her earlier shrillness. She was so focused on Ilara's scar that she couldn't even finish. I didn't... He said she had a... Ilara finished with, "The scar," cutting through the woman's stammering like a knife with her voice. She didn't touch it. She was not required to. It was a part of her, a proof of something Karen would never understand. "It was earned in the service of the nation whose peace you so adore." The words were not uttered vehemently or yelled to create a dramatic effect. They were said softly, evenly, and with a devastating, straightforward truth that physically struck Karen. They contrasted Karen's life of privilege, complaining, and fear of anything that would disturb her perfect bubble with a lifetime of pain, sacrifice, and duty. It was the harshest possible rebuke. Karen appeared completely destroyed. Her shoulders slumped, and she seemed to shrink inside her expensive workout jacket. She was a monument of self-importance and entitlement that was falling apart into a heap of regret and shame. She whispered, barely audible and devoid of any of her previous performative energy, I am so sorry. This was an honest, unfiltered, and dishonorable apology. A terrible, terrible error." "Yes," Ilara said simply, her gaze unwavering. "It was." She did not express her regret. Because it wasn't okay, she didn't say, "It's okay." She merely stated a fact, confirming the woman's catastrophic error and allowing the full weight of it to settle upon her. It was a harsh lesson that was necessary. Ilara then clearly indicated that the audience had ended with a small, dismissive nod to the deputy. "Deputy, I appreciate your diligence. That is all there is." The deputy, understanding the dismissal from a superior, nodded once. "Ma'am, welcome home. Respectful and sincere." It was a sentiment. He then turned to Karen, his expression making it clear that her presence was no longer tolerated. As the shell-shocked woman was led out the door and back toward the opulent lake house, which now seemed to represent everything hollow and superficial, he took her by the elbow, gently but firmly. Ilara watched them go, standing in the doorway of her cabin. Karen appeared defeated as she walked by with her head down and not looking back. Ilara closed the cabin door, the soft click of the latch sounding far final than the deputy's knock had. She let out a long, slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The adrenaline that had been humming quietly under her skin began to recede, leaving behind a complex mix of emotions: residual anger, a bitter sense of irony, and a profound weariness. She walked back to the kitchen table, gathered the personnel files, and put them away in her footlocker. The paperwork of war felt trivial compared to the battlefield she had just navigated in her own home. She picked up her coffee mug. It was cold now. She reheated it on the small stove, the familiar ritual helping to ground her. She returned to the porch, leaning against the railing, carrying the new mug. The cruiser was gone. The mansion next door was silent, its windows dark, looking less like a home and more like a museum exhibit. The lake's silence returned, but this time it was different. It was no longer the innocent silence of solitude. It was a silence earned, a peace that had been tested and, for now, won. She replayed the encounter in her mind: the boy's fear, the mother's hysterics, the deputy's initial suspicion, and then the moment of recognition. The salute. She hadn't wanted that. She never intended for her rank to serve as a shield or weapon in her personal life. But today, it had been the only thing standing between her and a deeply unpleasant and unjust outcome. The scar on her face tingled, a phantom reminder of the IED blast, of the pain, the recovery, and the long journey back to command. It was a badge of honor she wore unwillingly, a thing that marked her as different, as other, in the civilian world. Yet, in that moment with the deputy, it had been a mark of shared understanding, a symbol of a sacrifice he recognized and respected. She took a long, slow sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through her. The lake sparkled brilliantly because the sun was now higher and had evaporated the mist. A fish jumped, creating a ripple that expanded across the perfect surface. For the first time since the boy had appeared, Ilara felt her shoulders truly relax. The confrontation was over. She had a feeling, a deep certainty, that for the remainder of her leave, her peace would be utterly and completely undisturbed. Karen would likely never make eye contact with her again. She was aware that the story would spread through the local gossip mill and probably become legendary, ensuring that the old Miller cabin would be given a wide and respectful berth. Later that afternoon, as Ilara was splitting firewood with a practiced, rhythmic efficiency, she saw a movement from the corner of her eye. She stopped, axe in hand, and looked toward the property line. The boy was to blame. He was standing there again, but this time he wasn't hiding. His drone was not in his hands. He was just watching her, his expression a complex mix of curiosity and lingering fear. Ilara leaned the axe against the chopping block and wiped her brow with her sleeve. She gave him a small, acknowledging nod, but she didn't smile because she was concerned that would still frighten him. The boy didn't run. She was surprised to see. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. He stopped a safe distance away, his eyes fixed on her. He murmured, looking at his feet. "I'm sorry. My mother. She becomes like that." Ilara briefly remained silent. She said, "It's okay," and this time she meant it. It wasn't the boy's fault. He looked up, his gaze now openly curious, lingering on the scar. "Did you get that in the army?" he asked, speaking softly. "I did," Ilara replied. "Does it hurt?" Not any longer. He digested this, his young mind trying to reconcile the monster his mother had described with the calm, strong woman splitting wood before him. Then, he did something unexpected. He straightened his small frame, brought his hand up to his forehead in a clumsy but heartfelt salute, held it for a second, then turned and ran back home. Ilara stood there for a long time, watching him go. The boy's salute, innocent and unprompted, meant far more to her than the deputy's respectful gesture ever could. It wasn't given to her rank, but to her person. It was a connection, an understanding that transcended the ugliness of the morning. Finally, her lips were touched by a genuine small smile. Perhaps not all was lost. She picked up the axe and got back to work, the steady thunk of the blade hitting the wood echoing through the peaceful afternoon, a sound that now felt truly and completely like home.